there's writers and storytellers like myself who can get wrapped up into the literature of the whole thing, right? And you must write the great American novel and win the National Book Award, and suddenly you speak like you're from England or whatever. And it's like, dude, yeah, there's a place for that. It's cool. I like some of it too. I'm not bad-mouthing it, but there's also nothing wrong with pulp fucking fiction. Hello, welcome. Sunday morning. It's October. We finally made it to October, so things are looking up because it's fall and it's almost Halloween. So yay. My name's Tom Levine. I'm a award-winning author of young adult fiction and horror fiction, Bram Stoker Award finalist from a novel I wrote a few years back. I've also written for the comic book series Spawn with Image Comics and fiction for the BattleTech line of tabletop role-playing games under Tops Incorporated, which is really cool. But today, we're continuing a deep dive into Stephen King's Danse Macabre. Right there. This is a very old copy. If you're new to the podcast, I was given this book, original, not this particular copy, but a copy of the book when I was, I don't know, probably 12 at most. I started reading Stephen King's fiction, I think in 5th grade, when a relative of mine gave me, I believe it was Night Shift or possibly Skeleton Crew, but I'm pretty sure it was Night Shift, and my parents didn't give a shit. They just let me read stuff like that. They were just doing whatever. I'm a Gen X kid and proud of it, and we just didn't have things like parents to tell us what not to do. So anyhow, I had this copy of Danse Macabre for years, and then finally opened it and started reading it, and then realized, oh wait, this isn't a novel, this is nonfiction, this is stupid. And I'm pretty sure I either threw the book away or donated it, gave it to somebody else, whatever, but I don't have it anymore, that original copy. So I ended up with this old beat up copy that I got, I'm sure at a used bookstore somewhere many years ago. And what we've been doing is we started literally from the very first page of the book, the epigraph, and have been working slowly through it. We are not even into chapter 1 yet, although I do believe we'll make it there today. Where we're picking up from today is the last page of what King calls the forenote, and it's just the last couple of paragraphs here. I was skimming through it just before going live, and already I have stuff to talk about just in this first paragraph. So I don't know how far we're going to make it, but we're going to give it a shot. The point and goal of all this is, number one, for fans of King and or writers of horror or speculative fiction, things like that, things that we can learn from the book. Now, this came out in 1981. So, I mean, I would love for King. I know he's got some other things going on right now, probably, but it would be super awesome if he could write a second edition to this that covers the last, however many decades ago that was now, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it's been, probably not 40. But it would be really cool if he had the wherewithal to write a second edition for Danse Macabre, because so much has changed and grown in the horror community since then that it would just be really cool. But anyway, let's dive in. Here we go. This is the last couple of paragraphs. Actually, this is the second to last paragraph of the forenote, and King says the following: I guess that's about it, except I wouldn't want to leave you with any idea whatsoever that I believe what follows even approaches perfection. I suspect plenty of errors still remain in spite of careful combing. I can only hope that they are not too serious or too many. If you find such errors, I hope you'll write to me. Back when you could probably just write to Stephen King and maybe even hear back. I don't know. I hope you'll write to me and point them out so I can make corrections in any future editions. And, I hope you have some fun with this book. Nosh and nibble at the corners or read the mother straight through, but enjoy. That's what it's for, as much as any of the novels. Maybe there will be something here to make you think or make you laugh or just make you mad. Any of those reactions would please me. Boredom, however, would be a bummer. Let's stop there. You can see why this is going to be a very long process. Boredom, however, would be a bummer. That's one of those things that as writers or as storytellers, I should say, we should have just posted. We should have a Post-it note that says that right under our monitors, because that is the only rule for storytellers. There's, in fact, I've got it back here on this bookshelf behind me somewhere. There's a book titled Thrill Me. It's a nonfiction book for writers. And honestly, you don't even have to read the whole book. You could just read the title, Thrill Me. And if you tell yourself, oh, that's the rule, you're good to go. I've heard some other authors talk about making every scene an Instagrammable moment. Is this scene something you would take a picture of? Is this scene that you're writing or have written something you would tell a friend about if you saw it happen in real life? Whether that's in a contemporary setting, like an argument over at the Denny's, or if it's a supernatural setting or a fantastical setting, like a dragon attacking a bunch of warriors or whatever. If the scene you've written isn't something you would immediately take out your phone and start either live streaming or take a picture of and post to your social media, then maybe that scene needs a little bit of work. Boredom is the one thing we cannot have. How can you tell if your story is boring or not? Well, I know one of my chief indicators as an author, particularly of novels, is if I can't get through the scene myself. Like, this is my baby. This is my little baby novel that I'm putting out into the world. And if during the writing of that novel or at any stage during the revision or anything like that, I like click over and start reading something on another website, or I find something else I need to do, I kind of feel like that might be an indicator that this particular scene is not really working, and I might want to do a little bit of polishing on it. Boredom is the one thing we can't have. For me, writing this book has been both an exasperation and a deep pleasure, a duty on some days and a labor of love on others. As a result, I suppose you'll find the course you are about to follow bumpy and uneven. I can only hope that you will also find, as I have, that the trip has not been without its compensations. Stephen King, Center Lovell, Maine. I can't quite read that. I'm sorry. Looks like Lovell, Center Lovell, Maine. And that is the forenote. All right, cool. Let's move on. Chapter 1. October 4th, 1957, and an invitation to dance. For me, the terror, the real terror, as opposed to whatever demons and boogies which might have been living in my own mind, began on an afternoon in October of 1957. I had just turned 10, and as was only fitting, I was in a movie theater, the Stratford Theater in downtown Stratford, Connecticut. Pause here to let you know I just watched, I think for the first time, all the way through The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I believe was 1954 when that came out. And I watched it with my family, and we had a great time. It's a fun movie. It's a really well-made movie, actually, if you weren't aware. I'm trying to work my way through all the Universal monsters through October. Some of them are really hard to find, like online, or even my library doesn't have them. It's really strange. But in any case, according to IMDb anyway, Creature from the Black Lagoon is the first movie Stephen King remembers seeing. So just a little interesting tidbit there. The movie that day was and is one of my all-time favorites, and the fact that it, rather than a Randolph Scott Western or a John Wayne war movie, was playing was also only fitting. The Saturday matinee on that day, when the real terror began, was Earth versus the Flying Saucers, starring Hugh Marlowe, who at the time was perhaps best known for his role as Patricia Neal's jilted and rabidly xenophobic boyfriend in The Day the Earth Stood Still, a slightly older and altogether more rational science fiction movie. You know what? I'll keep going because he's going to talk about it, but we'll come back. In The Day the Earth Stood Still, an alien named Klaatu, I'm going to say that wrong, Michael Rennie, in a bright white intergalactic leisure suit. We talked about this in another episode. I love Stephen King's humor. He's not known as a humorist, but he's got just funny off-the-cuff stuff in a lot of his work, and that amuses the shit out of me. Lands on the mall in Washington, D.C. in a flying saucer, which, when under power, glows like one of those plastic Jesuses they used to give out at Vacation Bible School for memorizing Bible verses. See, that's amusing to me. Klaatu strides down the gangway and pauses there at the foot, the focus of every horrified eye and the muzzles of several hundred army guns. It is a moment of memorable tension, a moment that is sweet in retrospect, the sort of moment that makes people like me simple movie fans for life. Klaatu begins fooling with some sort of gadget. It looks kind of like a weed eater, as I recall, and a trigger-happy soldier boy promptly shoots him in the arm. It turns out, of course, that the gadget was a gift for the president. No death ray here, just a simple star-to-star communicator. That was in 1951. On that Saturday afternoon in Connecticut, some 6 years later, the folks in the Flying Saucers looked and acted a good deal less friendly. Far from the noble and rather sad good looks of Michael Rennie as Klaatu, The space people in Earth versus the Flying Saucers looked like old and extremely evil living trees with their gnarled, shriveled bodies and their snarling old men's faces. So I want to pause here to point out that even in his nonfiction, King is taking great care and great delight in describing things. I mean, he's describing a film, not something that he has imagined out of his own mind, and yet he still comes up with these lovely images like gnarled, shriveled bodies and snarling old men's faces. If you haven't seen Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and I probably have, but I don't recall, so that's going to have to go on my list now. If you haven't seen it, though, he was painting for you a wonderful picture. You can get the idea in your head of just what the young Stevie King is watching on the screen over in Connecticut at this time. And that's, I mean, what a great skill to not only have, but to nurture and to include no matter what kind of writing you're doing. It's the kind of thing I want to do with my nonfiction. I have a long-standing desire to write a very multiple different genres of nonfiction, and I just haven't committed to it yet. But this is the kind of thing that I would like to refer back to and say, how can you paint this picture in nonfiction instead of just a dry recitation of facts? He could have done that, but he's not. He's telling us a story. And you're going to see what the story is all about here in a minute. Going back to the book, rather than bringing a communicator to the president like any new ambassador bringing a token of his country's esteem, the saucer people in Earth versus the Flying Saucers bring death rays, destruction, and ultimately all-out war. All of this, most particularly the destruction of Washington, D.C., was rendered with marvelous reality by the special effects work of Ray Harryhausen, a fellow who used to go to the movies with a chum named Ray Bradbury when he was a kid. Holy shit. What would it be worth to go see a movie like Earth versus the Flying Saucers or The Day the Earth Stood Still or anything like that with Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen? Oh my God. Like, if heaven exists, inside the actor studio, if God exists, what do you want him to say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates? I want him to say, dude, we're screening Clash of the Titans and Ray Harryhausen and Ray Bradbury are in there waiting for you. Like, oh my God. Can you imagine? Anyway, that's fantastic. Klaatu comes to extend the hand of friendship and brotherhood. He offers the people of Earth membership in a kind of interstellar United Nations, always provided we can put our unfortunate habit of killing each other by the millions behind us. The Saucerians of Earth versus the Flying Saucers come only to conquer, the last armada of a dying planet, old and greedy, seeking not peace, but plunder. I could probably spin off of that for an hour, but I'm not going to. The Day the Earth Stood Still is one of a select handful, the real science fiction movies. The ancient Saucerians of Earth versus the Flying Saucers are emissaries of a much more common breed of film, the horror show. No nonsense about, it was to be a gift for your president here. These folks simply descend upon Hugh Marlowe's Project Skyhook at Cape Canaveral and begin kicking ass. I mean, that sentence alone, that idea alone covers, any number of horror films and or science fiction films and or science fiction horror films. Like, when I read a line like that, I go back immediately to a movie like Aliens, which is not science fiction by any stretch of the imagination. That is a horror show, as King puts it, set in space. This is a monster movie. That's it. I suppose you could stretch that out a little bit and call it military sci-fi, maybe, but I still think the military aspect is more just an element of the horror story rather than an element of military. There is, of course, military science fiction out there. It's what I write for BattleTech, for example. I don't think Aliens falls into that camp. Aliens is just a straight up horror movie across the board, regardless of its setting. And the thing that this sentence, the horror show and begin kicking ass, kind of makes me think of is that that's okay. Number one, as a film or a novel, a few minutes ago, we talked about the cardinal rule is to not be boring. It's perfectly acceptable. And this is something I think a lot of genre writers, apprentice genre writers, need to hear and embrace and understand, is that what you're doing as a speculative fiction writer is important because you can't be boring and because it's functioning as entertainment, and that entertainment is so fucking valuable. That's the takeaway. If you take away nothing else, there's writers and storytellers like myself who can get wrapped up into the literature of the whole thing, right? And you must write the great American novel and win the National Book Award, and suddenly you speak like you're from England or whatever. And it's like, dude, yeah, there's a place for that. It's cool. I like some of it too. I'm not bad mouthing it, but there's also nothing wrong with pulp fucking fiction. Nothing at all. It's a horror show. The bad guys show up and start kicking ass. Predator. That's a horror movie, right? Military-ish, sort of. Okay, great, but it's a fucking horror movie. It's a monster movie. Creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula. These are horror movies. The bad guys show up and start kicking everybody's ass. There is nothing wrong with that. So I hereby give you permission, if that's something you've ever struggled with, like, oh, my writing's not, literature, or it's not, fucking whatever. Dude, if somebody, and King will talk about this, I think it's in the introduction to Skeleton Crew, if I'm not mistaken, talks about how with his writing, and he has no misapprehensions about who or what he is and what it is he writes. And he says specifically, hey, if one of my stories gets you through the long wait at the DMV, I consider that, a job well done. And I just want to make that 100% clear. That's where I'm coming from as a writer, as a reader. Yes, there is great classic literature that is and should be written and read, and that's cool. But at the end of the day, did you entertain me? Did you get me through the line? Did you get me through the wait at the dentist's office? If so, you probably told a great story. Okay, off my soapbox, and I'm going to wrap this up here. It is in the space between these two philosophies, going back to the book, that the terror was seated, I think. If there is a line of force between such neatly opposing ideas, then the terror almost certainly grew there. Because just as the saucers were mounting their attack on our nation's capital in the movie's final reel, everything just stopped. The screen went blank. The theater was full of kids, but there was remarkably little disturbance. If you think back to the Saturday matinees of your misspent youth, you may recall that a bunch of kids at the movies has any number of ways of expressing its pique at the interruption of the film or its overdue commencement. Rhythmic clapping, that great childhood tribal chant of, "We want the show, we want the show, we want the show." Candy boxes that fly at the screen, popcorn boxes that become bugles. If some kid has had a black cat firecracker in his pocket since the last 4th of July, he will take this opportunity to remove it, pass it around to his friends for their approval and admiration, and then light it and toss it over the balcony. None of these things happened on that October day. The film hadn't broken. The projector had simply been turned off. And then the house lights began to come up, a totally unheard of occurrence. We sat there looking around, blinking the light like moles. The manager walked out into the middle of the stage and held his hands up, quite unnecessarily, for quiet. 6 years later, in 1963, I flashed on that moment when, one Friday afternoon in November, the guy who drove us home from school told us that the president had been shot in Dallas. And then he moves on to another section. Ooh, okay, so something happened. And we'll leave it at that. As any good serial film that inspired George Lucas, we will leave on a cliffhanger. Something has been announced at that movie theater in Connecticut, enough that they had to shut down a movie called Earth versus the Flying Saucers. What could it be? If it wasn't the Kennedy assassination, then what do you think it was? Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think it might have been. And we'll stop there for the day. We'll pick up with section 2 of chapter 1 next week. I hope this has been helpful. Hope that you're having a good time. And if you have any questions about anything that we're going over, please feel free to leave a comment and or seek me out on social media. You can also look me up at tomleveen.com. And as long as you spell my last name right, Leveen, you will find me on social media, on the web, and all of those cool places. In the meantime, I hope you will keep reading and keep writing and enjoying Stephen King's Danse Macabre. See you next week.